Hello everybody. On today's edition of Why the Hell Won't My E30 Start This Time, I'm going to show you how to change the ignition switch without removing the two bolts that are holding the steering wheel up under the dash. Now I've tried to drill into them and I broke off the tool, that's like tungsten carbide or whatever the hell hard material it was that I was trying to get in those screws. First I drilled and then I tried to hammer this thing in and loosen it and I couldn't do it. I broke it, and I was like, you know what, screw it, let's see if we could change it without lowering the steering wheel. And it is possible, and it's not too hard either. So the first thing I want you to note is that you need to make an accurate diagnosis, make sure that it is in fact your ignition switch. So if you're getting 12 volts at the starter when you're going to turn it at the solenoid, you know, if you're getting 12 volts there and you see that, you know, your starter's not working, it's possibly your starter, and the starter is a very tough job that involves removing the intake. So you want to do a good diagnosis first. But I will tell you, the ignition switch is going to be easier to change than the starter, so you might want to try that if you're just guessing. One note to make is you don't have to remove the steering wheel. If you do want to remove this steering wheel though, it does help if you know, to do this job if you remove the steering wheel, but it's not necessary at all. But if you do want to remove the steering wheel, which is, like I said, unnecessary, and it could throw off the alignment of the steering wheel the way it is with the wheels, so that's another thing too. If you don't mark it, you could throw off the alignment of the steering wheel. If you don't want to remove it, that's okay. But if you do want to remove the steering wheel, what you do need to do is put the key in the ignition after you disconnect the negative battery cable. Disconnect the negative battery cable, put the key in the ignition, turn it into the on position, and then that will unlock the steering wheel from the steering column. And what you do next after you turn the key in the on position is you can pop off the little BMW emblem on your steering wheel, and then you could go in there with the socket and the breaker bar or an impact and take that steering wheel off. But it's not until you put the key in the on position that you'll be able to actually pull the steering wheel off. So with that being said, let's go to the job. So first you're going to want to have a Phillips screwdriver, because you're going to need to remove these two things right here. So if you look under here, I've already removed the bottom cover from my steering wheel, right? And that's going to be this thing right here, this plastic cover. So this thing's going to have two screws, as you saw right there. Those two screws are going to come out, and those are just Phillips. Once you remove those two, you'll be able to remove the bottom plastic cover off. Once you get that off, you're going to want to remove the steering wheel, give yourself a little bit of headroom. So you're going to have this nut right here. I'm not sure what size it is, but this is going to be the least of your worries anyway. So once you remove the steering wheel using a breaker bar and the appropriate size socket to remove this, the first thing you're going to want to do before you pull the steering wheel off, as I did over here, is try and make an attempt to mark it somewhere so that you could keep track of where the steering wheel is with the teeth. You don't want to just pull the steering wheel off like I did. You know, I attempted to mark it, but I marked it wrong. So make sure you make precautions to mark where your steering wheel is in what do you call it, in regards to this thing here. So without further delay, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna set the camera down here, and I'm going to show you looking up at the ignition switch. You'll see it there, and this is the new ignition switch here. And see, what you're going to attempt to do is you're going to try and get in here with a pick tool. And so see how I'm sticking the pick here in this here hole, and what I'm going to try and do is get the old ignition switch out by putting this in here and then prying. And I've already got it loose, so what I'm going to do is do this, and at the same time that I'm pushing down on this little tab here, what I'm going to do is try and use something else to pry this away. Let's see if I get this right. Pry this away from the surface of what it's stuck to, which is going to be where the key goes in the tumbler or whatever it is. It doesn't need to be precise definitions, dang it. But anyway, what I'm going to do is stick this in the hole, and then I'm going to pry at the same time. And what I have here is a drop lamp to make it a little easier for me to see, because the worst thing about this job is the fact that you're down here underneath the dash, or whatever the hell you want to call it, underneath the steering wheel. I just hate working underneath here. Anybody who's worked underneath here knows that it's a total pain in the butt. So you're gonna stick this here in the hole, and at the same time I'm gonna pry with something else, like maybe a little pry bar. So push down with this one, and then here pry at the same time, and see, that lets this side go, right? So I got one side out, and maybe what you could do is stick something in that side to kind of hold it open, because the first thing it's going to want to do is go back in when you're prying on the other side. So you want to stick something in that side, and then over here, what the main problem we're going to have is that there's some wires here in the way, and these wires are going to want to get in your way, and you're going to want to not damage them unless you want to do further repairs on this car. And then you're going to pry here. As I said, we're going to pry and pull this thing loose, right? Now, the other thing that you're going to have trouble with is not too big of a deal, though. These two little, what do you call it? Zip ties. You're just going to want to cut this zip tie here, and then you have another zip tie right here, and just cut them. That way we could get these wires out of the way, and it'll give us more room to pull this out. One of the things you're going to try not to do is crack this plastic here. This is the plastic that goes over the steering wheel, and if you want to keep it intact, you don't want it to be broken, be really careful when you do this step. Okay, so here we are in part 2, and the first thing I want you to realize is that this ignition switch has certain wiring. The colors, the green is on this side with this tab, and the black is on that side with that tab here. See the wires, how they're the red, the green, black up here. What I want you to realize is that if you look at this here, you could be looking at it upside down, so I don't want you to do that. Before you take the old ignition switch off, what we're going to do is look here and compare and make sure we're looking at the right side, right? So green's on the bottom, and then we're going to flip them over, and then when we flip them over here, what we're going to be looking at is basically the position of the ignition switch. I want you to note that they are identical. If you look here in the hole, if you look here in this hole, you'll see that the little white line is perpendicular to this. So this goes this way, and then this part right here, you'll notice that it's going left and right, and these tabs are up and down, right? So this thing here, I've turned it to the left so that it's in that position. That's the position that it's going to be in if your key is out of the car. Now when you put the key in the car, you're going to turn it, and it's going to go click, right? And then another click for the starter, go back, and so we're going to turn it all the way to the left, and that's a position that your ignition switch is going to be in if you have taken the lock, if you've taken the key out of the lock. So put it in that position, and then next thing we're going to do, see, as I've already cut the things that hold the zip ties that hold the wire on here, this has dropped down and allowed me to pull this wiring down. And just be very careful not to cut the wiring. Do not damage the wiring, or you're going to really hate yourself. And the next step is going to be to remove this side of the old ignition switch. As you can see, if we go along the bottom of the steering column going this way. Now first I want to show you this. The reason I'm doing this is because I tried to drill into this thing and I broke off the tungsten carbide or whatever hard ass metal in there, and now I'm probably not gonna be able to drill it without a machine shop's help. So that's why we're doing this. Anyway, so follow this down, and we're going down here, and then you'll notice this first one here is going to be the connector for the ignition switch. And if you're not sure which one of these connectors down here is the one for the ignition switch, the ignition switch that I got from, I believe, O'Reilly's, it matches exactly the wiring color. So you'll see we have a baby blue and green, and here we have from BMW, baby blue and green, so you'll be able to tell that that's the correct connector. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a screwdriver and we're going to push on this side of the barb, and we don't even have to be worried about breaking the connector for the old one unless you are not sure that the ignition switch is the problem. If you are sure that the ignition switch is the problem, like I'm pretty sure it is because I've already removed the starter on this one, it still wouldn't start. You don't want to break that. But if you're sure that, you know, it is the problem, then you don't have to worry about breaking this connector. Okay, so here we are in the last part of this, I believe. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the screwdriver and shove it in this, push the barb thing in, and you actually don't even need to use the other hand. You could just use this screwdriver to push the barbed part in and then force it through this little rusted tunnel that's used to hold it in place. And then once you do that, it looks like it just lets free and you will be able to remove this whole thing out of the place that it's in. Now, once that you're able to pull all of this out, now we just have to figure out how to disengage this from the rest of the cluster. And if you look at the old connector here, it looks like it's just something that slides in place. See these slots, one here and this here. Now it looks like we can just slide this part off. Okay guys, so now our only task is going to be to remove this from the connector. So what I found out was that this thing was like plastic welded in here. So the best thing for you to do is to stick a screwdriver in between here and here, and when you stick a screwdriver in there, see my other hand over, oh you can't, okay, you want to twist. So stick the screwdriver in here, and once you stick the screwdriver in between here and the connector, you're going to twist the screwdriver, and that will allow this thing to free itself, and you'll be able to grab one side and with the other hand pull as hard as you can, like an otter on a freaking mollusk, and just pull that thing out, and you'll be able to pull both of them out that way. So just wedge a screwdriver in between this surface and the inside surface of this plug, and just, if anything, try not to damage these two parts. Remember, these two are going to be a part of your BMW, and this thing right here is just the part of the ignition switch that it's part of the old ignition switch. And then once we do that, we only have to remove this from the rest of the wiring, which is just more work, but I think it'll just pull off. So, oh yes, it does. It just pulls off. So just grab it and pull towards yourself while you hold this part. Hold this part in place, and then with your other hand, pull this towards yourself, and it will free. See these slots here, like I told you, they just slide into place. And then essentially what we're going to do is just a reversal of what we did. And then the next step is going to be to test this before we put it in. So just don't leave yet. What we're going to do is we're going to connect this up to the wiring, but before we put it in place, let's say you're guessing, right? You don't know. Well, maybe the auto parts store that you're with is really forgiving. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put this here in place. We're going to plug it in. It's already plugged in. And now what we're going to do is plug these two connectors in their place, their respective place here. And so I'm going to put the big one in first. And let's see, how is it? Oh yeah, okay, so we'll make sure these line up and we'll put them in place. Okay, so we're going to try and put those in place. Then what we're going to do is we're going to plug the car in. We're going to put this here, and then we're going to push this into place up here. The green wires the green wire is going to be up towards the driver's towards you in the driver's seat, and then the red wire is going to be facing towards your engine. So we'll do that next.